because the expectation is that men will behave like animals, either individually or in groups, and attack women. When you talk to the imams and you say, it's men should be taught to control their sexual urges, the imam will say, actually, it's women who should stay out of sight. It's women who should cover themselves up.
I want to start by talking about the grooming gangs crisis, rape gangs epidemic. Is this specifically an Islamic problem? Because many people have said that this isn't to do with people's religion or even ethnicity.
It has to do with people's ethnicity and with people's religion. And that's the core of the problem. So instead of protecting these victims, vulnerable girls, some of them as young as 9 years old, we fret about what to label it, what to call the problem. In the case of the UK, that many of them are of Pakistani origin and some of them Bangladeshi, but there are also other ethnic groups. In the case of the Netherlands, I lived in the Netherlands in the late 1990s. What you call grooming gangs in the UK, in the Netherlands, they were called lover boys. And it was young Muslim men, mostly of Moroccan origin, who did the exact same thing, who went and struck up relationships with young girls in very poor neighborhoods, white working class neighborhoods, and then gave them the impression that they were boyfriend and girlfriend, and then gave them presents, giving the impression to the young girl that her boyfriend cared so much and was seeking a life of commitment, and then found themselves pimped in the red light districts in Amsterdam and other areas where young women are sold into prostitution. When you look at the stories in Sweden and Germany, what you see are these gangs, many of them related to one another, blood relations of one another, preying on young women. I saw the phenomenon. I saw also sexual assaults perpetrated by groups of young Muslim men, mostly young Muslim men, but there are others. There are also non-Muslims. For instance, there were men from the former Yugoslavia, Serbians. Some of them come from some African countries that are not necessarily Muslim, but they are immigrants. They are doing this either in groups, and it is an organized system, such as the grooming gangs, or it's spontaneous, what looks like a spontaneous, cohorts of young men finding a vulnerable woman on the streets at different hours of the day, train stations, other places, and then assaulting in ways that to European eyes seem almost warlike. The cases that are reported in Sweden that sometimes end in the death of a victim. What we saw, I think it was in 2015, 2016, sort of the game of the harrush, which is when a young woman is encircled by a man, and they really do create this prey-predator dynamic. And the young woman is assaulted, her clothes are torn down, and these men form three concentric circles, where the inner circle is the one that is assaulting the victim in all these different groping, trying to put something in every orifice of hers. And then there is a middle circle that is cheering this thing on. And then there is an outer circle that makes sure the outside world doesn't stop it. Now, things like this happen regularly in Egypt. They happen in Pakistan. They happen in different parts of the Muslim world. But these things are now, you're seeing them in Europe. And what we made this trade-off in different countries. Not all countries did it, but countries like Sweden, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Germany, France. The trade-off is we want to protect a minority. We don't want terrorist activities. We don't want what happened, say, for instance, in Denmark in 2016, when an imam went shopping around with real and fake cartoons and mobilized the Muslim outrage. So there's all this tiptoeing around Muslim minorities for various reasons. But for whatever the trade-off is to sacrifice these young, vulnerable women, it is for Europe and Western societies to give up their commitment to the protection of children and women. And it's awful, and it's shameful, and it needs to stop.
As I said, there's been a long argument from generally those on the left who claim, if you look at some of the data, a lot of it comes from white people, particularly paedophiles in the UK, and it's not just one specific group. I thought I'd just say that just for a bit of balance, but I want to ask about Islam itself. What is it about Islam that you think made these people do these horrific crimes and essentially rape young white children? Is there something about the religion itself that you think, is there something in the doctrine? Is there something in the Quran? Is there something about the religion that made them do this, or is the religion irrelevant?
The religion is relevant, but the religion doesn't say go rape. I tried to explain the complexity of the angle where the religion is relevant in my book in Pray when I was trying to document this problem. These young men come from a different society with a different way of life, and it is an Islamic way of life, doctrinally, but also culturally. And the relationship between men and women in these parts of the world is governed by this honor and shame code. Women stay out of the public eye. When they come into the public eye, they're chaperoned and they're covered from head to toe. Because the expectation is that men will behave like animals, either individually or in groups, and attack women. And so when you talk to the imams and you say, it's men should be taught to control their sexual urges, the imam will say, actually, it's women who should stay out of sight. It's women who should cover themselves up. They are the ones who should not put themselves in vulnerable positions. Now, in a country where Sharia law is the way of life, the law of the land, that holds. And these dynamics do happen. Men attack women, and it depends if you're a woman who comes from a family of very strong men. There is retaliation. It's called an honor retaliation. And sometimes you have feuds that last for generations that spill the blood of, any member of anyone who is perceived to be on the aggressor's tribe or clan or group. What I've just described to you in Western societies is considered primitive. Primitive attitudes to women, primitive attitudes towards conflict resolution. But what we have done is we've allowed large numbers, mainly of men, to relocate to European societies. And then we've adopted this stupid idea that we don't have to assimilate them and that they can live amongst European societies and hold on to their culture and their way of life. And so it is literally a clash of civilizations that is playing out on the streets and on the bodies of women. And every single thing that Europeans said that they held dear, the freedom of speech and the way of life, it's all falling through the cracks. We're all giving it up, all the way down to this. I remember in the 1990s and even in the 1980s, Westerners writing books and saying things about Muslim countries and holding campaigns to end female genital mutilation, to emancipate Muslim women. And here we are now. It is European women, little white girls, who are being raped, and everyone left and right is looking the other way, except individuals like Tommy Robinson, but then he's in prison.
What do you think it says about British society that this issue was, first of all, covered up by the authorities? And you can look at every single layer, whether it's the police or the social administration, even some parents. Everyone let down these children, politicians, the media, and so on. What does it say, as I say, morally about British society that was allowed to happen, and that this issue was first of all covered up, and then second of all ignored, and actively ignored by the establishment in many cases. Can you talk a bit about our secular society, a bit about liberalism and modern Britain and morality?
So I have a Canadian friend called Gad Sad, and he describes it as suicidal empathy, which he doesn't say it's exclusively a problem that ails Britain, but apparently it's the entire West that is determined to commit cultural suicide. Yes, we do live in these post-Christian times where, again, to go back to the assimilation issue, assimilate into what? So if we were to deny them and to say, well, you can't practice Sharia law here, and you can't keep your way of life here, then when you come to Britain, what does it mean to be British? So normally what that would mean would be to teach them, to draw them into adopting Christian morality. But we live in this post-Christian world where morality itself has become quite diffuse. Some people, a lot of people just really take it for granted that you don't rape and that you don't attack women on the streets, and we have laws that protect us, and we will lean on the police, and so it's always someone else's problem. It's also an emasculated society, because again, to go back to the world in which the way of life is women are, and the relationship between women and men is governed by this honor-shame dynamic. But a real man is seen as a man who will absolutely not tolerate for his women or children to be attacked. And so when people with that mindset, they come to Europe and they watch European men stand by sometimes as these attacks are happening, and a society that doesn't respond to it, that has in fact put in place so-called hate crimes or whatever to cover up the deeds itself, what it does is it encourages these people. And so the perception of Britain, whether it's real or not, from the side of the perpetrators is that the women are for the taking and the men are emasculated, they're weak and they can't defend their women. And so there is nothing to stop them.
Do you feel that there's been a shift in the views of people across Britain and the world of these rape gangs? I know in the last few days Elon Musk has been tweeting endlessly about them, and there seems to be, from a media perspective at least, some more attention paid on these grooming gangs that we haven't seen in the past. So do you think there's been a shift, a sizable shift on the international stage as to this moral crime?
Yes, I see it, and I want to credit Elon Musk again for giving a voice to the voiceless. He's really consistent in his endeavor to say, okay, I know exactly what it is, what the right thing to do is, and he's doing it. And he's using his clout, his superpowers, to stand up for instance, the victims of the grooming gangs. So he can, what would be done to you in Britain if you were to devote your time to trying to bring it to the public eye, what happens to these young victims? You'd be vilified as a racist. You would probably be thrown in prison like Tommy Robinson for breaking the code of silence that we've built around these issues.
Well, just very briefly, he went to prison for contempt of court. He defied a court order. There are lots of arguments about that, but let's be very factual. That's why he is in prison today.
I have watched the documentary that Elon Musk put out and urged us all to do it, and I have heard Tommy Robinson's side of the story. The fact that you even have these contempt of court orders, and if you look at the entire context of the case, he is in prison because he has broken this omerta, this conspiracy of silence, to tell a narrative that is wrong and that is false. And an individual like Elon Musk with his position and his superpowers, can take on the system. They can't intimidate him with lawfare. They can't intimidate him with vilification. He's withstood it. They can't intimidate him with throwing him in prison. And so this is, I think, one of the reasons that someone with a megaphone as big as Elon Musk's has come round and said, I'm going to make a priority of defending the rights of these women, these vulnerable women, and highlighting this problem, this cancer that is in British society, German society, Italian society, French society, Swedish society. It is everywhere. Now, I want to make an absolute point of saying it's not all Muslim men who behave badly towards women. There are a lot of Muslim men who are very angry about this, and a lot of Muslim women are victims of the very same crazy culture, misogynistic culture, that is, tribal combined with, yes, Islamic. I'm sorry, that is the truth. So it's not all Muslim men, but it is a large number of men from immigrant communities who do behave in these ways. And why is it all breaking up? And yes, Elon Musk is part of it. I also think it is touching on, as long as the problem was limited to the working classes, who are vulnerable in many ways and too weak and don't have the powers to stand up to this, to stand up to the establishment, to stand up to the powers that be. That was one thing. But because of the scale of these crimes are now coming into middle class, lower middle class, middle class, upper middle class communities. And because of that, I think it is becoming, and it's not just the sexual crimes. There are all sorts of other crimes that are taking place. And there are changes that people are feeling in their own countries, and they're saying, this isn't my country anymore. And I think it's the combination of all of these factors. It's the combination of the outcome of the election in America on November 6th. All of this, I think, is emboldening many Europeans to think that it's a matter of survival now. It is no longer just you can sit back, or you can buy a ticket to another country, or you can move from this neighborhood to that neighborhood. There's nowhere left to move.
Beyond arresting the perpetrators and using the law to go after the people who committed these awful crimes, what is your prescription? How do we change the cultural attitude of these immigrants who are in Britain? Like, they're not going to be deported, almost certainly not under this Labour government or under a Conservative government. They're going to be in Britain for a long time and across the West for a long time, probably. How do we integrate these people? How do we prevent them from doing this sort of thing in the future?
I think it's a matter of political will. I just want to remind you, only 5 years ago, these governments were perfectly capable to put us all under house arrest for months on end. They were perfectly capable of closing the borders. If they had wanted to carry out a mass deportation of criminals, they could do it. It's feasible. It's a matter of will. And I think what's also feasible is to put together a program of assimilation that says you are no longer allowed to live by that way of life. You are now here, you're going to adopt our way of life. And it is not just Britain alone, but it has to be, this is how we do things. We have a successful example of Denmark. Denmark, 2005, 2006, was subjected, this crazy imam went shopping and creating outrage. The whole world put pressure on the Danish government, and the prime minister at the time, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, he just said no. What he did was he protected the journalists, he protected the cartoonists, and the Danish society had a debate, and the outcome of the debate was that it's their way of life that they were going to protect. And that was a complete agreement from Danes on both the left and the right. And so right now, if you are a Danish immigrant, or if you are an immigrant living in Denmark, whether you are Muslim or not, you have to live by the rules of Denmark. And it's the same case in Switzerland. And it's the same case in Singapore. So if you ask me, are these things feasible? Can it be done? Yes, it can be done. But it has to be political will. It has to be, you have to use the taxpayer money and the mandate from the voters to do what the voters want you to do. Close the borders and integrate or assimilate these immigrants, and those who do not want to assimilate them, remove them from the country.
What does that look like practically? Does that mean banning Sharia courts, for example? What kind of policies would you propose?
It is absolutely outrageous that we have Sharia courts. That is a parallel system. So which system, what is the British system? What is British law? What is German law? What is, Swedish law? And what does that say? So you've allowed an entire parallel system to take place of a population that has refused to assimilate, again, not all of them, but many of them. And then numbers are going to grow either through the birth rate or through more immigration. So what does that mean? Of course, you have to abolish Sharia law. It should never have been allowed to begin with. You have to have only one system that applies to everyone equally. That is what British law, British common law, is about that. And so that is what you apply. And you also are there to protect British national heritage, national identity, and British citizens, especially vulnerable children, like the little girls who are subjected to grooming and grooming gangs.
I want to shift gear a bit and ask about a recent terrorist attack in the United States. On New Year's Day, a ISIS supporter murdered 15 people at a New Year's celebration in New Orleans. He injured more than 35. He drove his car into a crowd. He used an AR-15 rifle. He planted pipe bombs, which fortunately didn't go off. Can you talk a bit about the threat of radical Islam in the United States today? I think many people, because there have been fewer attacks over the last few years, perhaps believed that radical Islam wasn't as much as a threat in the US, but clearly it is. So can you talk a bit about the situation today?
It is. I mean, if you look at radical Islamic ideology, the top target enemy country is Israel and the United States. Those two are mentioned in one breath. So nearly 25 years ago, when 9/11 happened, the threat at home here in America was discussed and debated, and there was a perspective that we are at war, yes, with an ideology, but we have to take a war approach towards this problem. And then there was a competing perspective as time went by, and that was, let's use the criminal justice system. We're dealing here with criminals. And those two competing perspectives, I think in a way in the last 20 or so years have been resolved and have become some kind of hybrid. And mixed in with this is the rise of progressivism, the woke agenda, where Islamists at home here in America who are actively subversive have found common ground with the progressives. So they were able to recruit here radicalized people, with their mosques. They have an online presence, they have a media presence. It's what I call dawah versus jihad. And jihad is when they apply violence, and in this case, terror attacks. So my take on this is, given the events after October 7, 2023, and Israel's retaliation, and the fact that America supported Israel or did not condemn Israel enough, that the Islamists are rekindling this. It's time. Within Islamism, you have, again, these two schools of thought of when to use dawah or persuasion, diplomacy, nonviolent means, and when to use violence. And in my view, the two prominent Islamist movements, the Islamist regime of Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood, at this moment are in a weak position. The Islamist regime of Iran is exposed. All their proxies are taken down. Hezbollah, Hamas is gone. The presence in Syria is gone. And there is even talk in 2025 that the regime itself could be gone. So they're highly motivated to use terrorism. And remember, terrorism is a tactic of the weak. And then when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood, yes, they do govern in Afghanistan. The Taliban is Muslim Brotherhood related. And yes, the government of Turkey is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, inspired by the Muslim Brotherhood. But they have also lost quite a lot of influence. And I think the idea is that we are going to see a cascade of these terrorist attacks on Western soil this year. And I think the idea is then for the dawah, the men in suits who come, who say, let's talk about this, we represent moderate Muslims, and who rely on the progressives, to say, we can help with bringing down these terrorist attacks, listen to us, and then they want that because they're actually more committed to the infrastructure of dawah. That's the long-term agenda than jihad itself. So this is how I take it. I also think that this incident in New Orleans, it raises a lot of questions. Stephen, there are, I think, 37 programs that I know of that are running with 5 different agencies: the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, the CIA, the State Department. And there's a lot of money that is poured into preventing attacks like this from occurring. And so part of this question is a dodge question. It's for Elon and Vivek to figure out this muddle, this spaghetti ball of acronyms and agencies and programs, and why was it that they couldn't prevent this from happening? This man was known for a long time. He was in the military. Apparently, they now know he was attending a mosque in New Orleans. The soft side, the progressives at DHS, they say countering violent extremism is what they call it. They don't call it Islamist terrorism. They persuaded the government and Americans to believe that we can work with so-called Muslim organizations. Well, who are the Muslim organizations sitting at the table? The Muslim Public Affairs Council, the Islamic Society of North America. These are affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood. You're basically talking, it's like bringing a fox into the hen house. So I think this raises a lot of questions. This is an incident that could have been prevented. Why was it not prevented? Where is all this money going into? Who exactly are we talking to? And I hate it, but a lot of the mainstream media is just going to spin this narrative as, oh, there is this troubled guy and he was going through a divorce and all that BS. But I don't think anybody, I think with Trump 2.0, the new team is not going to buy that nonsense.
He's got some very strong people around him on the issue of Islamic extremism. What kind of levers can he pull to tackle Islamic extremism in the United States, and how can he prevent future attacks like this? I know you've talked a little bit about maybe using Doge, but perhaps he should be deporting radical imams. I mean, look, I interviewed some pretty radical people in Detroit with links to the Iranian regime. I think it's extraordinary that some of those imams are even in the United States. So what kind of levers can Trump pull to prevent this stuff?
I think Trump can start a paradigm shift on this whole thing. And it's not only what he can do inside the United States, but it's what he can do in the United States and outside of the United States. He's got this golden opportunity where the key Muslim country in the world, Saudi Arabia, is aligned with him on bringing down and eliminating the ideology of Islamism. It's we in the West who struggle to, what label are we going to give this problem between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates? They call it Islamism, political Islam. And so, unlike 25 years ago, today we actually have Muslim governments that are willing to work with us on identifying the threats, identifying the leadership, identifying the content, and have experience in taking all of these things down. So Donald Trump and his team are well positioned to completely eliminate the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamist Iranians. There's also an opportunity to work with Israel because, again, Israel has now reached this moment in the war that Hamas started on October 7, 2023, where the initial stage was to destroy the military capabilities of Hamas. So the tunnels, the men, take their money down, their networks. And then the next step 2 is to go after the ideology. So I think right now you have a number of very strong countries that want to focus on taking down the ideology wherever it may be. So it's an amazing moment. Bring back the Abraham Accords, and or resume the Abraham Accords and then work together to get rid of these the imams that you saw in Michigan, but they're not only in Michigan, they are all across the United States. I think I told you in a previous interview that the fastest growing converts community is in Houston, Texas, and they're Hispanics. And so all of these efforts that they have in place to convert people who are not Muslim, to radicalize individuals who are Muslim but are not radical, to infiltrate institutions, to build alliances with progressive groups that hate America, all of that can now be taken down.
Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch more content, please subscribe to our new GBN America YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.